I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my coffee mug, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost didn't look at it. It was a Sunday morning. I had nowhere to be. My son had invited me over for lunch. He'd been doing that more often lately, which should have felt nice. It mostly did. But something about those Sunday lunches had started to feel off in a way I couldn't name. I dried my hands and picked up the phone. It was a text from my attorney, a man named Gerald Foss. I'd known Gerald for 11 years. He handled my estate planning, my taxes, the paperwork after my wife passed. He wasn't a dramatic man. He wasn't the kind of person who used all caps. The text said, "Don't go to your son's today. Call me. Now." I stood there for a second, just reading it twice. Then I called him. He picked up before the second ring. "Walter." His voice was careful, the way a doctor sounds when they're about to tell you something that can't be unsaid. "I need you to sit down somewhere." I told him I was already standing in my kitchen and that I'd rather just hear it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your son filed a petition with the county court on Thursday. He's requesting to be appointed your legal guardian." I didn't say anything. "He's claiming you're no longer capable of managing your own finances or personal affairs. He submitted a declaration from a doctor, someone I've never heard of, stating that you showed signs of cognitive decline during a routine visit last spring." I set my mug down on the counter. "The petition also names your daughter-in-law as co-guardian," Gerald continued. "Together, they would have full authority over your bank accounts, your investment portfolio, your pension distributions, and the house." There it was. The house. My wife and I bought that house in 1987. We painted every room ourselves. We've raised 2 kids in it. When she got sick, we converted the downstairs office into a bedroom. She wouldn't have to climb the stairs. When she died, I sat on the back porch for 3 hours because I didn't know where else to go. That house was not a financial asset. That house was the last place on earth that still smelled like her. "Walter," Gerald said, "are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "Tell me everything." "My son's name is Dennis. He's 43 years old. He works in commercial real estate, which I say not to brag, but because it matters. He knows exactly what properties are worth, and he has known for years what my house would sell for in this market. His wife, whose name I'll just say is Karen, works with him. They met at a real estate conference about 15 years ago. She's sharp, ambitious, the kind of person who notices the square footage of a room before she notices anything else about it. I never disliked Karen. I want to be fair about that. She was always pleasant at holidays, always remembered to ask about my health, but there was a quality to her attention that I could never quite describe, like she was taking inventory. Dennis had been suggesting, gently and then less gently, for about 2 years that I should think about downsizing, that the house was too big for one person, that the yard was too much work, that the neighborhood had changed, that I'd have more freedom without all that maintenance. I told him each time that I appreciated his concern and that I wasn't going anywhere. What I didn't know was that behind those gentle suggestions, they had been building something else entirely. Gerald explained it to me over the phone that Sunday morning piece by piece. The doctor who submitted the declaration, a Dr. Ellison, apparently, had seen me once, briefly, during a checkup where my regular physician was out of the office. I had been tired that day. My wife had been gone for only 8 months. I mixed up the name of one medication I'd recently stopped taking. Dr. Ellison had noted this in my chart as possible early cognitive confusion. Dennis had gotten a copy of that note. Gerald didn't know yet how, but he would find out. They had also been documenting things. Karen had apparently been keeping a log, dates, conversations, small things I had said or done that could be framed as forgetfulness or confusion. She had been doing this for at least a year, maybe longer. "They've presented it as a pattern," Gerald said. "It's not convincing to me, but it might be convincing to a judge who doesn't know you." "Can they actually do this?" I asked. "They can try," he said, "and they already have. The court date is in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I sat down at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the maple tree in my backyard was going orange at the edges. My wife had planted that tree. She called it stubborn because it always held its leaves 2 weeks longer than every other tree on the block. I thought about my son sitting across from me at Sunday lunches for the past year, asking me how I was sleeping, whether I'd forgotten any appointments, whether I needed help with anything around the house. I thought about how I had felt touched by it, how I had told my neighbor that Dennis was really stepping up. I had been reading concern on his face. What was actually there was something else. Gerald told me to stay home that Sunday. He told me not to call Dennis, not to confront Karen, not to say anything that would let them know we were aware of the petition. He said the most important thing I could do right now was act normal. I said that was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. He said he believed me and that I should do it anyway. I didn't go to Sunday lunch. I texted Dennis and said I wasn't feeling well. He replied with a sad face emoji and said to rest up and let him know if I needed anything. I stared at that message for a long time. In the days that followed, Gerald got to work. He pulled together 11 years of my financial records. He contacted my actual physician, Dr. Keene, who has been my doctor for 19 years, who was furious about the way his substitute's casual note had been used and agreed to provide a full evaluation. Gerald also hired a neuropsychologist to conduct a formal cognitive assessment. I went to that assessment on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat in a clean, quiet office and answered questions and repeated sequences of numbers and identified patterns on a page. It took 2.5 hours. When it was over, the doctor shook my hand and said I had performed well above average for my age group across every category. In fact, she said, your working memory scores are better than most 60-year-olds. You're 71. I didn't feel proud exactly. I felt something closer to rage. A cold, specific rage at the idea that my own son had sat across from me at my dining room table and strategized about how to have me declared incompetent. But I kept it quiet. I did what Gerald said. And then something happened that I did not expect. About 2 weeks before the court date, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. It was my daughter-in-law's sister. Her name was Patrice. I had met her maybe 4 times over the years, always at family events, always briefly. I barely knew her. She said, I'm sorry to call you out of nowhere like this. I've been going back and forth about whether to do this for 3 weeks, but I just can't stay quiet. I told her to take her time. She said she had overheard a conversation between Dennis and Karen about 6 months ago, when she was visiting their house and they didn't realize she was still there. She heard them talking about the timeline, about how once the guardianship was approved, they could have the house appraised and listed within 30 days, about how the proceeds, combined with my investment accounts under their control, would give them enough liquidity to close on a commercial property they'd been trying to acquire for 2 years. She'd been sick about it ever since. She had confronted Karen once, privately, and Karen had told her she was misunderstanding the situation, that this was all about protecting me, that she was being dramatic. But Patrice said she knew what she heard, and she said Karen had stopped inviting her to family events since then. I don't know if this helps you, she said. He's your son, and what they're doing isn't right. I thanked her. I asked if she would be willing to speak with my attorney. She said she would. Gerald said it was significant, but that we needed more. Testimony about an overheard conversation would be compelling, but it could be disputed. He wanted documentation. What we got was better than that. It came from my grandson. My son has a boy named, well, I'll call him my grandson, because that's who he is to me, and honestly, that name is mine to protect. He's 16. He's quiet and serious, and he has his mother's dark eyes and his grandfather's tendency to say too much when he's uncomfortable. We've always gotten along. He used to spend summers with me before everything got complicated. About 10 days before the court date, he showed up at my door on a Saturday afternoon. Just knocked. His mom's car wasn't in the driveway, so he must have ridden his bike the 2 miles from their house. I opened the door and he stood there on the porch, looking like he was trying to decide whether to run. Can I come in? He said. I made him a sandwich and we sat at the kitchen table, and for a few minutes he didn't say anything. He just picked at the crust of his bread and looked at the table. Then he put his phone face up between us and pressed play. It was a recording. The audio quality was rough, a little muffled, like the phone had been in a pocket or set on a shelf somewhere, but the voices were clear enough. My son's voice, my daughter-in-law's voice, They were talking about me, not about protecting me, not about my well-being. They were talking about the closing costs on the commercial property, about whether the house would need any work before listing, about how the pension distributions would be redirected once the accounts were under their management, about the fact that the court date was in 2 weeks and their attorney said the petition looked strong. Karen said, at one point, he doesn't suspect anything. He still thinks Dennis is just being a good son. And then Dennis said something that I will not repeat here, because I have chosen not to give it more space in my life than it has already taken up. But it made clear, in his own words, that this was not about my well-being. It never had been. The recording was 4 minutes and 37 seconds long. When it ended, my grandson turned the phone back over and looked at me. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he said. "I didn't know what else to do." I put my hand over his. This kid, 16 years old, sitting in my kitchen, was shaking hands because he had chosen to do the right thing against his own parents. I don't have the words for what that felt like. I told him he had done exactly the right thing. Then I called Gerald. The next 10 days were the most focused of my life. Gerald moved fast. He had the recording authenticated. He coordinated with Patrice, who gave a formal written statement. Dr. Orr. Keene submitted a comprehensive letter outlining my health history and his professional opinion of my capacity, which was, in his words, unambiguously intact. The neuropsychologist's report went in as well. We also went after the declaration from Dr. Ellison, the one they'd built the whole case on. It turned out that Dennis had specifically sought out that particular substitute physician. There were emails. Gerald found them through the discovery process, because once a petition like this is filed, both sides have to disclose supporting documentation, and buried in what they submitted was a forwarded email chain that they clearly hadn't read carefully enough before turning over. It showed that Dennis had contacted Dr. Ellison's office directly, described specific symptoms he claimed to have observed in me, and asked whether those symptoms could be documented during an upcoming appointment. Ellison, to be fair, may not have understood what he was being asked to participate in, but the email chain made the timeline undeniable. Gerald said he had seen a lot of guardianship cases over the years. He said he had never seen someone hand the other side this much before walking into a courtroom. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in October. I wore the gray suit I've worn to my wife's funeral and then to every important thing since, because she always said it made me look like I meant business. I drove myself. Gerald met me outside the courthouse with his briefcase and a cup of coffee he handed to me, without asking whether I wanted it, which is one of the reasons I've kept him as my attorney for 11 years. Dennis and Karen arrived about 5 minutes later. Dennis saw me from across the parking lot and started to lift his hand in a wave, that automatic reflex, and then something in my face must have told him that today was different, because he stopped. Karen looked straight ahead. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and no patience for anything that wasted her time. That, I decided immediately, was in my favor. Dennis and Karen's attorney went first. He presented the petition, the declaration from Dr. Ellison, the log Karen had kept of incidents, the argument that I was a vulnerable elderly man who needed protection from himself. Then Gerald stood up. He was methodical and quiet about it. He submitted the neuropsychologist's report, Dr. Keene's letter, Patrice's statement, and then, with the judge's permission, he played 38 seconds of the recording, the portion that contained Karen's voice saying that I didn't suspect anything, and Dennis's voice saying what he said. The courtroom was very quiet. The judge looked at Dennis over the top of her reading glasses for a long moment. Then she looked at his attorney and said, "Counsel, would you like a moment?" It took her 40 minutes to rule, which Gerald later said was fast. She dismissed the petition. She found that there was no credible evidence of cognitive decline and significant evidence that the petition had been filed in bad faith. She referred the matter to the state attorney's office for review of potential elder financial abuse charges. She also noted, for the record, that the behavior documented in the recording was, in her words, among the more troubling things I have seen presented in this courtroom. I sat very still through all of it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. I felt the particular exhaustion of a person who has just confirmed something he was praying wasn't true. My son did not look at me when it was over. He walked out with Karen, their attorney, between them, and he didn't look back. I changed my will that same week. Gerald had already been advising me to update it, given everything. Dennis had been the primary beneficiary of my estate, including the house. That was no longer a reflection of my wishes, and I said so plainly. I left the house to my grandson, not to be sold, to be lived in, or to be his to decide what to do with, when he's old enough to make that decision with a clear head and without anyone's hands on his back. He's 16. He has time. I also set up a modest trust for Patrice. Not a large amount, but enough to matter. She had nothing to gain from making that phone call. She did it anyway. That deserves to be acknowledged. Dennis received nothing. I want to be honest about how that felt. It did not feel like victory. Writing my son out of my will felt like losing him twice. Once to whatever greed or fear or pressure had turned him into someone capable of this, and once on paper, in black and white, in Gerald's office on a Tuesday afternoon while rain hit the window. I signed the documents. Gerald notarized them. I drove home and sat on the back porch for a long time. My grandson moved in with me in December. His parents' marriage did not survive what happened, or rather, did not survive what came out about what had been planned before it happened. Karen moved out in November. Dennis is living in a rental across town. I don't know much more than that. My grandson sleeps in the room that used to be the guest room, which still has the wallpaper my wife picked out in 1994, pale blue with small white birds on it. He said he liked it. I told him we could repaint it. He said no, it was good. He started at a new school in January. He's doing fine. Better than fine, actually. He joined the debate team, which surprised me, and maybe shouldn't have. Some mornings I hear him downstairs before I'm up, making coffee badly, burning the first attempt, starting over. He always leaves a cup for me on the counter with a sticky note that says something like, "You were up late," or "The neighbor's dog was at it again." Little observations. The way quiet people communicate. I drink the coffee. I read the note. I put it in the kitchen drawer with the others. I don't know what my son and I are now. I've thought about it a lot. I spent 43 years being his father, driving him to practice, helping him with homework, flying across the country for his wedding, holding myself together at his mother's funeral so he wouldn't have to hold himself together alone. I loved him without condition for a very long time. I think I still love him. I don't think love stops that quickly, or maybe at all. But I have learned that love is not the same as trust, and trust, once you watch someone dismantle it deliberately and strategically over the course of a year, is not something you simply get back. Maybe someday he'll have something to say. I'll listen, I think. I'll hear him out. But I am not holding my life open for it. There's something I want to say to anyone who is listening to this who has a parent who is getting older. Go see them. Not to check on them, just to see them. Bring coffee. Sit at their kitchen table. Ask them what they're thinking about, not how they're managing. Ask about the people they miss. Ask them what they're proud of. And if you ever find yourself calculating what their house might be worth, stop. Just stop right there. Put that thought down and ask yourself, who taught you how to love, and whether this is how you're choosing to return it. My wife used to say that what people do when they think no one is watching is the only honest measure of character. My son thought no one was watching. His 16-year-old boy was. And that boy is downstairs right now, burning toast and leaving notes on the counter, and he is the best thing in this house, the best thing I have to show for all of it. Not the investment portfolio, not the equity in these walls. Him. That's what I almost lost. That's what I almost let them take from me without ever knowing it was going. I am not going to let that be the thing I forget. I keep coming back to the maple tree in the backyard, the one my wife planted the year we moved in. Every fall it holds its leaves 2 weeks longer than every other tree on the block. Stubborn, she called it, and she meant it as a compliment. I used to think that was just a quirk of the tree. Now I think it was a lesson she left behind without knowing it. Hold on. Don't let go before you're ready. Don't let someone else decide when it's time. What Dennis and Karen were counting on was that I wouldn't notice. That I was old enough to be managed, slow enough to be outmaneuvered, alone enough to have no one in my corner. And for a while, I'll be honest, they almost had it right. I was tired. I was still grieving. I was taking my son's Sunday invitations as love because I needed them to be love. That's the thing about a slow, deliberate betrayal. It doesn't feel like betrayal while it's happening, it feels like attention. But here's what they didn't account for. A 16-year-old boy who already understood, in his bones, the difference between right and wrong. My grandson didn't come to my door with a plan. He came because he couldn't live with the alternative. That's not something you teach a kid by sitting them down and explaining ethics. That's something that grows in a person who has been shown over and over what it looks like to do the hard thing anyway. He made a choice that cost him something real: his own parents' trust, the comfort of staying quiet, the easier path of pretending he hadn't heard what he heard. He chose integrity when it was genuinely difficult, and that is the only time integrity means anything at all. I think about what it took to build the case Gerald built. Every document, every evaluation, every conversation, Patrice risked to tell me what she knew. It required me to stay clear-headed when I wanted to fall apart. To read the situation accurately, instead of wishfully, to trust what the evidence showed me rather than what I wanted to believe about my son. That kind of thinking, disciplined, honest, slow when it needs to be slow, is what kept me from walking into that courtroom unprepared. The truth was always there, but you have to be willing to look at it directly, without flinching, even when it's about someone you love. And then there was just a matter of getting through it. 6 weeks of knowing what I knew and saying nothing, of texting my son that I wasn't feeling well and watching him reply with a sad face emoji, of sitting in a neuropsychologist's office for 2.5 hours, proving something that should never have needed proving. That kind of endurance is quiet. Nobody sees it. But it's what gets you from the moment you learn what's been done to you to the moment you can do something about it. Dennis thought he was being clever. What he was actually doing was paying a price he hadn't finished calculating yet. His son, his marriage, his father's trust, his name. Those things don't show up on a real estate closing document, but they're real, and they compound. My grandson burned toast again this morning, left me a note that said it's already been a week since the first bad batch. Improvement incoming. I put it in the drawer with the others. That drawer is fuller than the one that holds the legal documents. I know which one matters more.